Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of these end times. Would you believe this weekend marks the 8th anniversary of my first video posted to YouTube, and that was about the evil number 666. And I will put a link to it below, and I posted it on July the 31st, 2008. And you should watch it because every word of that video is still true today. And I have been disappointed because no theologian that I know of has acknowledged my discoveries in that video. And that is that Jesus arranged the verses in St. Matthew's Olivet Discourse to let you know that the weapon he will use to defeat the Antichrist is Mary's rosary. It's truly an amazing prophecy. Now, this last week, I want to talk about what happened, and that is that Pope Francis did go to Poland to attend the World Youth Day. And as I said a week ago, Pope Francis had two major goals. One is to convince the Polish bishops to admit more migrants into Poland, and his second goal was to convince them to allow divorced and remarried Catholics to receive Holy Communion. Everything else you saw in the media this week was all window dressing. All the 200,000 people attending Mass, all the youths, all of his photo ops like going to the Auschwitz Museum and talking to Holocaust survivors, all that was subservient to his real goal, which, as I said, he did not publicly announce. That was all secret. But it's very interesting that the very first thing he did when he got off that plane last Wednesday was to have a 90-minute meeting with the Polish bishops. And I am sure he read them the Riot Act. And it's very interesting that Church Militant has published an article on it, and they did a video also, which I'll show you a clip from in just a minute. And the headline of this article, as I say, this was on Church Militant. That's Michael Voris' outfit, and I usually watch him. He's very informative. Polish bishops, no communion to remarried divorcees. Congratulations, you held your ground in the face of the false prophet, Pope Francis. And this article is by Bradley Eli. And the announcement comes shortly after bishops met privately with Pope Francis in Krakow. And I'm glad Church Militant is finally getting on the ball on this. 3 years ago, when Pope Francis originally called the Synod of Bishops, I told you at the time, his goal was to take the daily sacrifice away from the prince, as prophesied by Daniel in chapter 10, verse number 3. Michael Voris said, no, that was just a diversion. His real goal was to bring about gay marriage. And I told you, no, just the opposite. Gay marriage was a diversion. His real goal was to make the holy sacrifice illegal and invalid. In other words, to take it away from the prince, to take it away from Jesus. He wants to make all consecrations of priests in the Catholic Church to be invalid. And here's what this article goes on. Archbishop Stanislaw Gadecki, head of the Polish Bishops' Conference, made the announcement Wednesday evening to the press after the bishops met privately with Pope Francis earlier in the day. After the 90-minute question and answer session, the 117-member Bishops' Conference had with Pope Francis at the cathedral in Krakow, Archbishop Gadecki told reporters there's a need for constant discernment when shepherding remarried divorcees, but added, now listen to this communion for divorced and remarried cannot be solved in a confessional box in 2 minutes or even a couple of years. This is a path for the priests and the laity to walk together, knowing that if a marriage has been validly concluded, there is no ground to administering communion to remarried divorcees. That's very plain. I'm sure that is not at all what Pope Francis wanted to hear. And this article continues. Pope Francis flew to Krakow Wednesday afternoon for the start of World Youth Day. And as I said, all the rest of that was window dressing. Everything you saw in the media, that was to pull the wool over your eyes. In fact, even in Catholic media like EWTN, they emphasized all of the frosting on the cake. They didn't get into any of the substantive discussions that the Pope had with the bishops. They want to promote the false prophet, just like the secular media. And was greeted by Poland's President Andrzej Duda and government leaders. The closed-door meeting with the Polish bishops took place shortly afterwards. Pope Francis went right to business. Father Federico Lombardi, the papal spokesman, related that the meeting was private in order for all to be able to speak freely out of the spotlight of cameras, which could exert some unnecessary pressure on those attending. And now I want you to look at a brief report from Church Militant by Christine Miles to let you know that Pope Francis was repudiated by the Polish bishops.
The Polish bishops are reaffirming that the divorced and civilly remarried may not receive Holy Communion. The bishops made the announcement only hours after a closed-door meeting with Pope Francis, who arrived to the country Wednesday for World Youth Day. The president of the Bishops' Conference said in a press conference following the meeting, quote, "If a marriage has been validly concluded, there is no ground to administering communion to remarried divorcees." The Polish bishops have also resisted calls to open up their borders to an influx of Middle Eastern refugees, a topic Pope Francis addressed during the meeting, urging the bishops to do more for migrants.
Okay, thank you very much for that report, Christine Niles. And as I say, I believe Church Militant is coming around to understanding what Pope Francis is up to. And he is not going to give up. Now here's an article from the LifeSite News where Pope Francis talks about decentralizing the church, which is an absurd idea. What a concept that is. And this article goes on, the Pope related that in a decentralized church, bishops' conferences might on their own initiative not only interpret papal encyclicals, but also looking at their own cultural situations, might approach some specific issues in an appropriate manner. This is nonsense. And it would be as if Jesus said, any man who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, except under cultural circumstances. Pope Francis is trying to get the camel's nose inside the tent, if you ask me. It was in October 2015 that Pope Francis called for a more decentralized church where bishops' conferences could be given authority, even on doctrinal matters. Critics saw the move as contrary to the Apostolic Creed, in which Catholics profess belief in a church that is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Of course. Cardinal Francis Ahrens, Prefect Emeritus of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, said at that time that on matters of faith and morals it would be impossible for local churches to teach differently than Rome because it would compromise the oneness of the church. The Ten Commandments are not subject to national frontiers. A bishop's conference in a country cannot agree that stealing from a bank is not sinful in that country, or that divorced persons who are remarried can receive Holy Communion in that country. But when you cross the boundary and go into another country, it now becomes a sin. Well, Cardinal, you are 100% correct. And Pope Francis brought this concept up to the Polish bishops. What he wants to do is he wants to peel off a few of the liberal bishops and get them to start breaking church 2,000-year tradition and the words of the gospel and what Jesus said. If he can get one or two bishops to break from the rest of the bishops' conference, he hopes that he can get the faithful to support them. I hope he is wrong. Archbishop Gadecki told reporters after the meeting with the Pope that the church in Poland will refuse communion to divorced and remarried Catholics. And now I want to mention one more thing, which is very serious, and this is an appropriate way to start perhaps my 9th year on YouTube. One of my subscribers asked me if Pope Francis is going to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart. as Mary requested at Fatima. And I told him that those days are past. The window of opportunity is gone. Pope Francis, that is not going to consecrate Russia. That goes against everything he stands for. Russia will never be consecrated. And Mary warned that the popes would follow the kings of France to their doom if they did not consecrate Russia. And that will happen. Pope Benedict will be martyred, just as the last king of France was martyred. However, Mary did make other requests, and that is to the laity. You and I, we can do what she said. She said, pray the rosary, wear your scapular, and make the 5 first Saturdays. Mary said, this was at the end of her prophecy, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Russia will be converted, and an era of peace will be granted to mankind. Notice that sequence of events. Russia is not converted until after the triumph of Mary's Immaculate Heart. I believe she knew even back then that the popes would not fulfill their duties, and they would suffer the consequence. But Mary's heart will triumph, and you and I have a very important hand in that. And so, let me begin my 9th year on YouTube with that note of hope. Thanks for all of your support. You have made it very easy, a very pleasant 8 years here on YouTube. I know there will not be another 8 years. And I shouldn't end on a down note like that, but just the same, if you would like to know more information about my ministry, visit my thirdeaglemedia.com website.